you lovely people, and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, the 80s Mixtaper. And welcome to 1982. We have finally arrived in the second fifth of the best decade in music and pop. And what a show we have coming up. I'm delighted to also say that since the turn of this actual year, 2026, we've had a wonderful influx of new listeners to the show. So if you are new here, welcome. To just catch you up, here's a little backstory. Back in 2016, as part of a very minor midlife crisis, I attempted to listen to every single UK charting entry into the charts from the 31st of December 1979 to the 31st of December 1989. By the end of 2021, I'd done it, thousands of singles and artists and musical styles. This podcast is the story of that journey, from the death of disco through to the birth of rave culture and grunge. Each week, we inch the calendar forward a little more and discuss the singles and the bands and the singers behind them being the best, brightest, or the most bonkers the decade has to offer. We discuss the highs, the lows, the breakups, and everything in between. Unfortunately, due to copyright laws, we cannot play the music on the pod, but to counteract this, we have created 13 song playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music, the links for which you can find in the episode description, plus a full track listing. So what most people tend to do, I think, is flip between the pod and the songs when they're out for a walk or knitting or whatever. Each episode we take either the first 7 or last 6 songs, and I constantly refer to them anyway, so you'll always know which one I'm talking about. So that brings us to today and playlist 35 and the very beginning of January 1982. So what do we have in store? Well, we'll kick off this snowy new year with the Stranglers, bringing the harpsichord back into fashion. Lindsey Buckingham breaks from Fleetwood Mac to get into trouble, and Shakin Stevens continues his chart domination. Plus we get more from Stevie Wonder, we get a very special TV theme tune to our American cousins, and we meet the Mobiles and Elkie Brooks. We are also going to break from the norm this week, in that at the very end of the episode, even after we've said our goodbyes and play the outro, there is going to be a bonus track, and I say that advisedly as the content isn't a bonus per se. We've reached a particular song called The Boiler by Rhoda and the Special AKA, and as a charting single, it's relatively minor. However, in terms of its societal message, it's a vital addition to the 80s patchwork. But please, please, please be aware that there is a reason why I haven't included it in the actual playlists for playlist 35, and that is because the song could be incredibly triggering for people, as it's about the themes of sexual violence and rape against women. Indeed, the song itself is a narrative account and ends with screaming. I heard it for the first time and actually felt traumatised. Jerry Dammers, who produced it, famously said it's a song you only need to hear once, and he is right. It's horrific. I ummed and ahed about not including it, but I think the societal context around women and misogyny in the 80s is vital. So when we get to the end, we'll play the usual outro. There will be a brief pause, and then we'll talk about The Boiler by Rhoda and Special AKA. But please do only listen if you're interested. I wouldn't want to intentionally hurt any of you listeners. Anyway, so without further ado, let's get back to the music and the start of 1982. So 1982 starts with a bizarre classic that has been featured in pop culture across the years. It is oddly dainty, but the subject matter is very dark, and yet I can remember my father singing it behind the wheel of his Vauxhall Cavalier taking my sister to ballet lessons, possibly never knowing the deeper meaning behind the lyrics. This is a story about a song that should not have worked. It's a story about a harpsichord, a waltz, and a substance that turned one of the most aggressive bands in England into something entirely different. It is the story of the Stranglers and their 1982 masterpiece, Golden Brown. This is track 1, playlist 35, and the start of 1982. Let's peel back the harpsichord. We have to talk about the aggression first. In 1974, a man named Jet Black, an ex-businessman who'd owned a fleet of ice cream vans and an off-licence called the Jackpot in Guildford, decided he wanted to be a drummer again. He recruited a guitarist named Hugh Cornwell, a bassist named Jean-Jacques Burnell, and eventually a keyboardist named Dave Greenfield. They were older than the kids who would eventually start the punk revolution, and they were significantly meaner. They were the guys who got into fights at the Roundhouse, who toured with Patti Smith, and who were constantly being banned by the BBC for lyrics that were, let's say, less than polite. They had top 10 hits in 1977 with Peaches and No More Heroes, which both reached number 8 in the UK charts. By 1981, they were at a crossroads. They had released 5 albums, they had survived the initial explosion of punk and were moving into something weirder, darker and more experimental. They had just released a concept album called The Gospel According to the Men in Black, which didn't exactly set the charts on fire. Their label, EMI, were starting to get nervous. They wanted a hit. They wanted the old Stranglers back. Instead, the band gave them a song about heroin and a girl, played in a time signature that makes most people's head spin. That swirling, hypnotic harpsichord, that waltz that isn't quite a waltz. Let's break down the maths, because this is where Dave Greenfield really shines. Most pop music is a steady 4/4 beat. Golden Brown is famously difficult to dance to because it alternates between 6 and 8 and 7 and 8 time signatures in the introduction. Some musicologists describe the riff as a recurring phrase of 13 beats, effectively 3 bars of 3/4, followed by 1 bar of 4/4. And then there are the lyrics. For 20 years, the band treated the meaning of the song like a Rorschach test, telling interviewers that listeners heard whatever they wanted to hear. Jet Black once famously and jokingly claimed it was about Marmite. But in 2001, Hugh Cornwell finally admitted the truth in his book, The Stranglers Song by Song. He stated, "Golden Brown works on 2 levels. It's about heroin and it's also about a girl. Both provided me with pleasurable times." The girl was a Mediterranean girlfriend of Cornwell's at the time who had golden brown skin. The drug reference was more literal. It was the colour of the substance itself. The record label hated it. They told the band it was not a single and that you couldn't dance to it. They essentially buried it as an album track on their 6th record, La Folie. But then something strange happened. BBC Two, which usually steered clear of anything associated with the filth and fury of punk, made it their single of the week. It began climbing the charts, eventually peaking at number 2 in the UK in early 1982. And it became their biggest hit ever, kept off the top spot only by the Jam's Town Called Malice, which we will definitely be hearing on this pod. It was a moment of absolute vindication for a band that had been written off as relics of the 1977 scene. They were now the authors of a timeless Baroque pop standard that would be covered by everyone, from indie bands to mariachi groups. Never a frown with Golden Brown. Track 2, and we harken back to a time when the Cold War is in full swing, a constant grey hum of anxiety in the background of everyday life. In the UK, the charts are a mix of new wave polish and pop rock sheen. Bands like Duran Duran and Spandau Ballet are ascending, defining a new, visually driven era of pop music. But, for a brief, striking moment, a synth-pop track from a virtually unknown band out of Eastbourne cut through the noise with an atmosphere that was anything but typical pop fodder. Dark, European and slightly atonal. It was a song that channeled the tension of a divided city and turned it into a haunting, memorable hit. This is Drowning in Berlin by Mobiles. Track 2, press play now. This is a song I have a strange relationship with. On the one hand, I think it's a well-crafted piece of music. It's cold, it's moody, atmospheric. The synths are amazing. The lead singer has a beautiful but piercing voice. On the other, I can never decide whether by 1981 it's either absolutely on the button for the zeitgeist, or by the end of 1982 it's already become anachronistic. To explain badly, there's a lot that happens in the 80s. Miners' strikes, Thatcherism, the Falklands, Reagan. But in my tiny mind's eye of being a child, there are only really 2 shades. There's the bit before 1983, and that bit is brutalist, grimy, not always the happiest place, which plays very much into that Cold War narrative. the threat of nuclear war, general unrest. And then there's the bit after 1983, pretty much up to 1989, where it's all pastel-coloured linen suits, neon, good times and too much cocaine. And I know that there's far, far more to it, but that's often how it feels. And Drowning in Berlin should be the poster child for the former because it conjures up brutalist architecture, East German Stasi in little spectacles and trench coats with that bridge in the middle which sounds like a computer bank going out of control in a fairground while some weirdo says "Sind Sie allein in Berlin?" like some effeminate serial killer. But I think by 1983 it feels very dated. I think everything just feels more optimistic at that point, but I digress. Formed in 1981, Mobiles hailed from the East Sussex area. The band consisted of vocalist Anna Maria, bassist David Blundell, guitarist Chris Downton and Russ Madge, and brothers Eddie Smithson on drums and John Smithson on keyboards and synths. Blundell described their beginnings simply as just a band practicing in the Drive pub. They were signed by the independent label Rialto Records shortly after forming. While playing local pubs, they recorded this particular song, first released in December 1981. At this point, they were completely new to the music scene. The track gained radio play and began to climb the charts. The song's distinctive, swirly, discordant circus nightmare sound at the bridge captured an aesthetically European music trend popular in early 1982, casting atonal notes back to a different time. The single spent 2 months in the UK Top 40, peaking at number 9 in early February 1982. It was a rapid ascent for the band. David Blundell recounted the sudden change. 1 minute we were doing gigs in Eastbourne, and the next minute we got a call saying they wanted us to do Top of the Pops. The single's success placed Mobiles within a unique period of British pop that embraced European sounds and synth-pop atmospheres. The song is layered, featuring an interpolation of the 1988 waltz Sobre las Olas by Juventino Rosas, known to many as the loveliest night of the year. This element contributed to the track's distinctive, slightly eerie atmosphere. Despite this initial success, it was short-lived. Their follow-up single, Amor Amor, with a similar European feel, reached number 45 in the UK. Their self-titled debut album was released in 1982, but to little fanfare. Mobiles ultimately became known as a one-hit wonder. The band members have shared memories of the excitement and the challenges. Blundell mentioned a potential follow-up single, Victim of the Services, which he stated was reportedly stymied when we were told our follow-up wouldn't get airplay because of the Falklands War. The original group eventually disbanded. Anna Maria reportedly lives in Seaford, East Sussex, and works in healthcare, while Blundell is now based in Madrid, Spain. Drowning in Berlin remains a notable moment in 1982, capturing the atmospheric tension of a divided Europe and briefly propelling a band from the UK coast onto the national stage. Next, let's catch up with one of the many protagonists in the Fleetwood Mac story, a certain Mr. Lindsey Buckingham. Today, we're looking at the man who spent years as the sonic architect for one of the biggest bands on the planet. Surely we all own a copy of Rumours, and if you've never listened to it, go and do that now, I'll wait. But despite their galactic level of success, he did that only to find himself retreating into a small storeroom in Burbank to make some ironic, campy noises on his own terms. By 1982, Buckingham's arc was at a fascinating place. He had joined Fleetwood Mac in 1974 alongside Stevie Nicks, transforming a struggling British blues outfit into a pop juggernaut with the release of the 1975 self-titled album and the era-defining Rumours. However, after the experimental high-budget odyssey of 1979's Tusk, an album he essentially willed into existence for better and for worse, the band's leadership, specifically Mick Fleetwood, made it clear that the group wasn't interested in continuing down that prohibitive and risky creative path for their next collective effort. Feeling the need to establish his own personal laws and protective creative innocence, Buckingham began work on his first solo album, Law and Order, in February 1981. He recorded almost everything himself, playing bass, guitar and keyboards in a lo-fi new wave style, before being pulled back into sessions for Fleetwood Mac's Mirage. Yet, one song emerged from these solo sessions that didn't feel like the rest of the album's sarcastic, abstract noodling. It was a piece of shimmering, melodic pop perfection that cast back to Rumour's dreams and would cast forward to Tango in the Night's Everywhere in 1987. That single is Trouble. This is track 3, press play now. Trouble peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in January 1982. While it was a major hit in the US, it was an absolute monster internationally, spending 3 weeks at number 1 in Australia and 2 weeks at number 1 in South Africa. Interestingly though, in the UK it peaked at number 31. The story of Trouble is a masterclass in creative failure leading to technical innovation. Buckingham originally wanted the song to have a completely live feel, a departure from his usual method of layering instruments one by one. He brought in his old mucker Mick Fleetwood on drums and George Hawkins on bass for a late night session that lasted until 4 a.m. Despite their efforts, Buckingham felt like the live takes lacked the specific breathier atmosphere he was chasing. His solution was radical for the time. He took a 4-second loop of Mick Fleetwood's drumming from those sessions and used it as the foundation for the entire track. He then painstakingly overdubbed his own cymbal crashes and percussion fills to disguise the loop, effectively creating a human drum machine. The song's distinctive mandolin-like guitar sound was achieved by recording the parts at half speed, 15 inches per second, and then playing them back at full speed, which raised the pitch and added a crystalline shimmer to this signature fingerpicking. The music video for Trouble, directed by Jerry Watson, further emphasised Buckingham's unique position in the industry. It featured a big band of musicians that served as a nod to his history, including Mick Fleetwood and former Fleetwood Mac guitarist Bob Welch and Bob Weston, alongside Walter Egan and Dwight Twilley, all while playing on white screens, their heads miming the odd 2-3-4 introduction before they're all drumming or playing guitar while Buckingham sings in close-up. Buckingham had set out to make a sarcastic solo record, but in Trouble he accidentally crafted a sincere pop staple that proved his sonic experiments could work just as well outside the safety of his famous band. For track 4, occasionally on this show we will feature music from film, TV and the musicals. And this next song is almost canonical, especially to American listeners to this pod. But make no mistake about it, this song and the programme it represents made its way across the pond too. When you think about the sonic architecture of the 1980s, you probably think of synthesizers that sound like neon lights or drums that hit with the impact of a falling skyscraper. But from January 1981 until 1987, a different kind of sound drifted through the American living room. It was melancholic, it was gentle, it was deeply human. The lonely piano, the wryness of when the keyboard comes in, the strings, the humour, the heartache, the human storylines, the issues that it tackled, and the blueprint it set. This is the story of a television theme that became a top 10 Billboard hit and a cultural shorthand for quality drama. This is Mike Post featuring Larry Carlton. This is Theme from Hill Street Blues. Press play now. To understand why this song works, you have to understand the two titans who built it. First, there's Mike Post. Born Leyland Michael Postill in 1944, Post was a child prodigy who became the musical director of the Andy Williams Show at just 24. Before he was the king of the TV theme tune, he was a session guitarist playing on Sonny and Cher's I Got You Babe, and a producer winning Grammys for Mason Williams' Classical Gas. By the time Hill Street Blues creator Stephen Bochco called him, Post had already conquered the charts once with the jaunty harmonica-driven theme for the Rockford Files. Then there's Larry Carlton. If Mike Post is the architect, Larry Carlton is the master carpenter. Known as Mr. 335 for his trademark 1969 Gibson ES335 guitar, Carlton is one of the most prolific session guitarists in history. If you love the solo on Steely Dan's Kid Charlemagne or the shimmering textures on Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark, you love Larry Carlton. In 1981, Bochco and Post sat down to watch the pilot of a new kind of police show. Most cop shows of the era sounded like a car chase. Lots of brass, lots of funk, lots of adrenaline. But Hill Street Blues was different. It was messy, it was an ensemble piece, and it focused on the blues, not just a police metaphor, but for the internal emotional toll of the job. Post told the Archive of American Television that they decided to forego the typical hard-driving street sound in favour of something poignant. Post went home and wrote the theme on his piano in just 30 minutes. He called Bochco, played it over the phone, and they both knew they had it. To bring that poignancy to life, Post brought in Carlton. The resulting track wasn't just a TV intro, it was a phenomenon. Released as a single on Elektra Records, it climbed to number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 in November 1981 and spent 5 months on the charts. It even won the Grammy for Best Pop Instrumental Performance in 1982. The show itself, Hill Street Blues, became the Casablanca of television. It pioneered the use of handheld cameras, overlapping dialogue, and multi-episode story arcs that define the golden age of TV today. Though it initially struggled in the ratings, its record-breaking 8 Emmy wins for its first season ensured its survival. It was a show about flawed people trying to stay careful in a dangerous world. And Mike Post and Larry Carlton gave that struggle a voice that still echoes today. For track 5, the 1980s in Britain was a time of high-gloss production, shoulder pads and voices that could cut through a humid pub like a lighthouse beam. This is the world where Elkie Brooks found her ultimate lane, not as a fleeting pop star, but as the queen of British blues, a singer whose grit was forged in the 60s and refined through the rock and roll chaos of the 70s. The result, a power ballad for the ages. Fool If You Think It's Over. This is track 5, playlist 35. Press play now. This is the song that cemented Elkie Brooks' status as an adult contemporary powerhouse. But let's rewind to look at the woman herself. Born Elaine Bookbinder in Salford in 1945, she was the daughter of a Jewish baker. When it came to singing, she was a lifer. At 15, she won a talent contest judged by the notorious Don Arden, Sharon Osbourne's father, and soon found herself on the road. By 1964, she was supporting the Beatles at their Christmas shows and recording with a young Jimmy Page. But the 60s were a struggle of cabaret and singles that didn't quite stick. It took a hard pivot into blues rock with the band Vinegar Joe, alongside a then unknown Robert Palmer, for her to find her wild woman persona, belting out R&B with a rawness that rivaled Janis Joplin. When that band split in 1974, Elkie took the solo path, eventually hitting big with Pearl's A Singer, which hit number 8 in the UK charts in 1977. However, by 1981 she was ready to up the stakes. She teamed up with legendary producer Gus Dudgeon, the man who helped Elton John conquer the globe, for her compilation album Pearls. It became the biggest selling album by a British female artist in history at that point, spending 79 weeks on the chart. And tucked inside that record was a cover that would eventually outperform the original in the UK. Fool If You Think It's Over. Yes, that's right, folks. This is a cover. The story of Fool If You Think It's Over starts not with Elkie, but with Chris Rea in 1978. Rhea wrote the song for his younger sister Paula, who was 17 and devastated by her first major heartbreak. He wanted to tell her that this tragic scene wasn't the end of her world, that she had years and years ahead. Cheery stuff from the late great Chris Rea. Rea originally envisaged the song as a gritty Memphis blues track for Al Green, but Dudgeon, who also produced the original, turned it into a California soft rock hit. While it was a massive top 20 hit in America, it stalled at number 30 in the UK. But Elkie Brooks didn't care about the chart history. She just loved the song. She actually insisted on recording it for the Pearls sessions, despite the label choosing most of the other material. Recording it at the Mill studio with Dudgeon again, she brought a different kind of authority to the lyrics. Where Rhea's version felt like a brotherly nudge, Elkie's felt like a woman who had actually survived those pains of 17s and come out the other side with a black belt in Aikido, which, by the way, she literally has. Her version reached number 17 in the UK in early 1982, becoming a staple of the era. In a strange bit of pop synchronicity, Rea himself once approached her incognito backstage at Top of the Pops to ask for her autograph, a secret tribute from the songwriter to the singer, who finally gave his track the UK success it deserved. For our penultimate song today, we're back with that stalwart of double denim and wiggling hips, Shakin Stevens. In 1981, Shakin Stevens, born Michael Barrett in Cardiff, was the undisputed king of the UK singles chart. He had just come off the back of a monster year, securing 2 number 1 hits with covers of This Old House and Green Door. He was the ultimate retro stylist, a man who could summon the ghost of 1954 and make it feel like the present day. But as 1981 bled into 1982, Shaky was ready to do something he'd never done before. Reach the top with a song he wrote himself. This is a story about a rehearsal at Nomis Studios in London in January 1982. It's a story about a keyboardist named Garrett Watkins being told to bring his squeeze box because Shaky had an idea. And it's a story about a name chosen purely because it rhymed with truly. This is Oh Julie, track 6, playlist 35. The year 1982 started with Shakin Stevens as the newly crowned king of male British solo acts. He was the biggest selling British artist of the decade so far and would hold that belt at decade's end. But right now, critics were beginning to wonder if he was just a hard-working stylist with a good ear for oldies. His previous single, a cover of the vintage ballad It's Raining, had peaked at number 10, suggesting the public might be cooling on his brand of 50s revivalism. Shaky needed a hit to prove he wasn't just a karaoke machine in a denim jacket. He found it in Oh Julie. Recorded in late 1981, the track was a departure from his usual rockabilly template, leaning heavily into a Cajun-inspired sound. This was largely thanks to Garrett Watkins, a frequent collaborator of Dave Edmunds, whose accordion dominates the track. Shaky later recalled in 1,000 UK number 1 hits that he explicitly wanted a Cajun feel, though some critics at the time thought it sounded more like a German beer fest. The song was released on January 8th, 1982, and by January the 30th, it was sitting at number 1 on the UK singles chart. It was his 3rd chart topper, and crucially, the first one he co-wrote. The lyrics, by Shaky's own admission, were lazy. He chose the name Julie simply because it rhymed with truly, leading to lines like Julie, oh Julie, if you love me truly. Critics, like those at Popular, were less than impressed, calling the melody a one-trick pony and the rhyming scheme artless. Yet, the public didn't care about the highbrow analysis. Oh Julie was an international juggernaut, reaching the top 5 in 13 different countries and hitting number 1 in 8 of them, including Austria, Sweden and the Netherlands. It even found a second life across the Atlantic when Barry Manilow covered it in late 1982, taking it to number 38 on the US charts. The music video added to the song's bizarre legacy. It features Shaky singing next to a lamppost in the cold before spying a woman, Julie, who leads him into a house that is inexplicably filled with CCTV cameras and photos that come to life. It's camp, it's slightly mental, and it's pure Shakin Stevens. Produced by Stuart Coleman and arranged by guitarist Mickey G, Oh Julie served as the lead single for the album Give Me Your Heart Tonight. While Shaky would have one more number one, the perennial Merry Christmas Everyone in 1985, Oh Julie remains the peak of his power as a songwriter. We end our normal programming today with a certain Mr. Stevie Wonder. We have found him standing at the centre of a movement. In 1981, he had released Happy Birthday, a song that wasn't just a pop hit, though it was a massive one, especially in the UK, where it hit number 2, but a Trojan horse for a political mission. He was using the machinery of Motown to force a national holiday for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. onto the American calendar. It worked, eventually. But at the end of 1981, Motown was getting nervous. Marvin Gaye was gone. Diana Ross was gone. The label's president, Jay Lasker, was looking at the 1982 release schedule and seeing a Stevie-sized hole in the balance sheet. His solution was a classic industry move, a greatest hits package. But Stevie, being Stevie, didn't just want to look back. He bargained for a double album with 4 brand new tracks to anchor each side of the vinyl. The first of those songs arrived on December the 30th, 1981. It was a mid-tempo, synth-heavy, perfectly syncopated demonstration in one-man band construction. It's a song about a woman who is so fine but is also misunderstood by every man who chases her, except, of course, for the narrator. This is That Girl. This is track 7, playlist 35, our final track today. That Girl is the sound of Stevie Wonder continuing his 1980s with absolute confidence. While the world was shifting towards the cold, gated reverb of the decade, Stevie took those new electronic toys and made them feel organic. He recorded the track at his own Wonderland studios in Los Angeles, playing every single instrument himself. The drums, the piano, the Fender Rhodes, and that impossibly funky synthesizer bassline. The song became a historic juggernaut on the charts. It spent 9 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard R&B singles chart, which remains the longest run any Stevie Wonder single ever had at the top spot. It even bested the 7-week run of Master Blaster from just a year prior. On the Billboard Hot 100, it peaked at number 4, staying there for 3 consecutive weeks in the spring of 1982. Lyrically, the song contains a clever nod to contemporary pop culture. Stevie sings about an emotional rescued love, a direct reference to the Rolling Stones' 1980 album and title track Emotional Rescue. It's a moment of cross-genre pollination from a man who had opened for the Stones a decade earlier to expand his own audience. However, the song's success was bittersweet for Motown because Stevie was characteristically struggling with deadlines. The single was released 5 full months before the actual album, Stevie Wonder's original Musicarium 1. Jay Lasker later told Billboard that he believed they lost out on 1 million album sales because the hit single had already peaked by the time the record hit the shelves in May 1982. Despite the corporate headaches, the musical legacy of That Girl is untouchable. Its bouncy, flawless groove have made it a favourite for hip-hop producers. Tupac famously sampled the hook and the harmonica for his 1995 track So Many Tears, and you can hear its DNA in songs by Queen Latifah and 50 Cent. It remains a bridge between the classic genius period of his 70s albums and the synth-pop era that was about to take over the world. So that, folks, is how 1982 starts. But do join us next week for the second half of Playlist 35, where we slip deeper into January and hear an absolute kiddie classic by Tight Fit. We get one of the greatest Hall & Oates singles. We get what I think is the best XTC song, and we go wild in the country with Bow Wow Wow amongst others. As always, if you can tickle the subscribe button if you've enjoyed the pod, and leave us a review please, it's very much appreciated. For everyone who wants to end today's show now, have a lovely week and take care. For everyone else who wants to hear the additional bonus track, The Boiler by Rhoda, with the special AKA, stick around until after the usual theme music. But like I said at the start of the episode, I'm not including it on the playlist, so you'll need to find it on Spotify and Apple Music yourselves. And the song, The Context, is incredibly triggering and deals with themes of sexual assault and rape. So only listen if you want to hear the important historical context. Otherwise, see you next week. Cheerio. So, to end, we need to talk about the single The Boiler. We spent a lot of time talking about the sharp-suited, black and white checkered world of Coventry, England. We've met the Specials, those kings of the ska revival who gave us the apocalyptic ghost town in 1981. But today, we're looking at what happened when the wheels came off and the message got darker than anyone expected. Before we get to the song, let's meet Rhoda Dakar. Born in Hampstead in 1959 and raised in Brixton, Rhoda was working for the Department of Employment, literally signing people on the dole, when she was spotted dancing at a selector gig. She became the lead singer of the Body Snatchers, an all-female ska band that scored hits like Let's Do Rocksteady. That is a song which I'm annoyed I didn't include in the original run of 1980 pods, but hey, sometimes I make a call I regret. When the band split in 1980, Rhoda began touring with the Specials and eventually became a core member of their successor group, the Special AKA. Please now play The Boiler on Spotify or Apple Music, and then we'll come back and discuss some context. The Boiler was released on January the 11th, 1982. It wasn't a song as you or I know it. It was a visceral account of date rape told in the first person. The title itself comes from the derogatory slang term boiler used for an unattractive woman, a label the protagonist uses for herself as she recounts being flattered by the attention of a man who eventually rapes her in a dark alley. The story behind it is as heavy as the lyrics. It was originally written by the Body Snatchers as their first original song. Jerry Dammers, the mastermind of Two Tone Records, wanted to record it immediately, but the label's parent company, Chrysalis, pushed for something more commercial. It sat on a shelf for a year. Rhoda recorded her harrowing vocal part, a process she described as long and difficult, nearly a year before the single finally hit the streets. The timing of the release was almost eerily prophetic. On January the 5th, 1982, just 6 days before the record came out, a businessman named John Allen was convicted of raping a hitchhiker. The judge in that case, Bertrand Richards, sparked national outrage when he fined the perpetrator only £2,000 and claimed the victim was guilty of a great deal of contributory negligence. In this environment, The Boiler was a hand grenade. It reached number 35 on the UK singles chart, despite receiving almost no daytime radio play. Radio 1 notably dropped it from their playlist, though they denied an official ban. Dammers produced it as a statement of ideals, not for profit, famously saying that the song was only meant to be heard once. The video, directed by art student Lizzie Soden, was just as uncompromising. Rather than showing the assault, it used a collage of TV clips depicting violent men and passive women to put the act into a broader social context of power and entitlement. It remains a singular terrifying piece of performance art and continued conversations which sadly still happen in the present day about sexual violence. Goodbye.